stuff here, and we've already learned how to get our JavaScript to talk to our websites and grab elements. And now what we want to do is actually learn how to respond to an event when the button is actually clicked. So there's a few things to know. We've talked about this a little bit here. Let me open this up here. So we're using a form and an input, okay? That's a little bit different than doing something like this. If I have a button here, okay? A button, and then I say calculate, and let's just go to our page here. Okay, so calculate and calculate. Now we lost our live connection here, but that's okay. I had to refresh. So these look the same, right? But they're not. Okay, the way that you interact with these buttons is not the same. Like on a button like this, if you wanted to respond to an event, you could do it here in HTML, or you could do it in your JavaScript, and you're going to use onClick. And then you're going to set it to some function like my onClicker, okay? And that's how you're going to work with buttons. But we're not going to do that in this video, but I wanted you to be aware of it because you're going to find it on the internet, and you're going to possibly want to be like, I used onClick on my input type submit, and it's not working. What is going on? Or it's not working the way I expect it to. And there are some differences between input type submit and the button. So what I want you to do, as part of your own homework and time, I want you to go onto Google and do a search. Difference between input submit and button, and there are going to be a whole bunch of articles that say all the differences between using this input type and this button type, and you'll learn a lot, and it'll do you some good to go check that out. In our case here, we are using input type submit and value equals calculate, and we have to handle it a special way. But so how do we do that? How do we work with a form and an input? Because obviously we're not going to use the onClick like I just mentioned. Well, this is where the form comes into play. So the first things first is we actually have to grab the form right here. And so we're going to say var, let's just call this form, equals document.getElementById. And we haven't given it a ID yet, but we're just going to call this x is what percent of y. We'll give it a very specific name in case we have more than one form for the other operations. And then over here in index.html, I'm just going to set an ID on the form. Okay. We're not even going to use the button itself to listen for a click. Okay. The form is going to listen for an event, which is a little bit different. Not the button, but the form itself. So we've grabbed the form, and what do we do now? Well, we say form.add event listener. In fact, look at that. That's pretty cool. It had some properties that pop up. Add event listener. Type is a string. The event, a capture bool. So there's 3 different properties you can put in here, or parameters. Okay. We're gonna use 2 of them. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna say form.add event listener. Okay. We want to listen for submit. Now this is a very specific keyword. I did not make this up. This is a reserved keyword. Okay, you have to spell it correctly, otherwise it will not work. We are looking for the submit event, okay? And then we're going to pass a function in here. And this function here is the function to be called when the form is clicked. Now, I'm doing an inline function here. If this is confusing you at all, we could also have done this. So we could have said var and my calc function equals function, okay? And then instead of doing this, we could have said my calc function, and that would have worked just the same, and then this function would be called when the event is triggered. Okay, but I don't see any need to do that, and the reason why is this function is very specific. It's not really reusable, meaning like the other percentage operations that we may do would not use the same code. It would use different code, and that's not what we're looking for because our code does a very specific thing. So I'm going to create the inline function here as a parameter. So this function here called add event listener, the first parameter in it is a string, and the second parameter is a function. And this, again, this may be confusing to you if you're brand new. What is going on? How am I creating a function inside of another function parameter? It doesn't make sense. And you know, in many languages, this is something that you'll never do. You'll never actually define a function within a parameter itself. But we have that advantage in JavaScript. So that's what we're doing here. We have a function. This is the function that will be called after the button is clicked, okay? And so we're adding the event listener to the form. I can't stress that enough. If you're adding this to the button, it won't work, and you'll probably get frustrated. So add it to the form that the button is inside, okay? We put the button inside the form. There's 3 inputs. One is a type submit, and it's inside the form, okay? Are you with me so far? You're like, yeah, shut up about saying that already. I got it the first time. Well, I'm just letting you know. So what do we want to do? We want to take the data from the 2 fields, okay, and then run the math operation and then spit it back out into the results string, okay? But first things first is probably just making sure that this even worked, okay? So let's do that now. Say alert, and we clickety clacked something, okay? So let's go back to our code. I'm going to refresh the page because I think it's still disconnected. Click calculate, and we clickety clacked something. So it definitely worked, okay? Definitely worked. So we get these elements to listen to them, and once we have the element, we add the event listener. You can't add the event listener until you actually have the element, as you can see right here, okay? Something to keep in mind. Some people like to do this, so they don't like to actually store it in a variable at all, okay? They like to do something like this, where you actually do function chaining. And so we say document.getElementById, and then once it finds it, okay, instead of storing it in a variable, we're just using it the once, and we add the event listener to it right here on the spot. That's another thing you can do. It's a little bit long and kind of sloppy, so I don't typically do it unless I see a need for it. So we're going to just store the variable here and then call add the event listener on it. Okay. So we got this going now. Now we need to grab the data from the 2 elements here and get them and calculate the things on it. So what happens though if there's no data in those fields? Okay, so for instance, let's say that I want to get the data out of those fields. We already know how to do that, right? The dot value. So if I say var x equals numfield1 dot value and var y equals numfield1 dot value, okay? And then what I do is let's say alert, and we're going to say say x plus space, plus space plus y. Okay, let's see what happens when I don't enter any data in here, and I refresh the page. Okay, it's blank. Okay, that's not good. Do you think we're getting any errors? Let's see here. I just opened up the console. Whoa, that's kind of off the screen here. Okay, so let's turn off this alert here too. Let's just console.log these bad boys. Console.log, let's say x, and console.log, let's say y. Okay. So as you can see, nothing's happening, right? It's all blank. This is bad. This is not good. Our fields are null. Oops, and this should be number field 2, of course. There we go. That's more like it. And yeah, so nothing's there, right? So we should check for that, because we don't want to run a math operation on something that doesn't exist, right? Like, let's go ahead and do that now. This is called validation, form validation. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say if, okay, numfield1. So if not numfield1 dot value, okay, or if not numfield2 dot value. Okay, so what we're saying here is if this is null or undefined, okay, so doing the not sign here, okay, we'll actually check for null and undefined. So if there's no value, if it's null or undefined on this one, or if it's null or undefined on this one, let's let the user know. So alert, please enter values in the fields. So if there's an error, we go into there. Otherwise, we'll actually do the math operation. Okay, this is called validation. Okay, let's go ahead and run the page and see what happens. Calculate. Oh, please enter values in the fields. So it knows now. So we actually wrote some validation, some error handling here. If there's no data in here, please let's go ahead, or please enter values in the fields. We send up an alert. Otherwise, this means it worked. Okay, what we want to do is we want to get the values here. The problem that we have though is values from text fields are text. We can't do math operations on texts, can we? Well, let's see what happens. What if we say console.log, okay, x plus y. So let's see what happens. I'm curious myself. So what if we say 5 is what percent of 10, which should be like 50%, right? We calculate it. Oops, our form reset. That's another problem that we're going to have to solve here. You didn't see it print because it went so fast. So what we want to do here is let's do an alert instead. Alert x plus y. That's another problem we're going to have to solve that you'll run into as a developer as well. Okay, so let's again say 5 plus 10, calculate. What? 510, right? It's not right. We got to do some magic here. And if you were trying to go ahead and do this on your own, you probably solve this problem here. That's not going to work for us. We can't just work with string fields here, okay? So there's a different thing we need to do, okay? We need to, I'm going to command X or control X this, and we're going to say parse float. And what this function does, okay, this is a built-in function. What it's going to do is it's going to take your string and it's going to turn it into a float or floating point number, a number with a decimal. Now, of course, you probably are remembering that I've said in past that all JavaScript numbers are floats, which they are, but if you don't parse the float, and let's say you did parse int, it will actually truncate the decimal behind it. And we don't want to do that in case the user adds a decimal. Okay, so parse float for the first field, and then we want to do the same thing for the second field. Parse float, and that's going to take a string and turn it into a number. Now if I do alert, and I say x plus y, okay, and then we run the page, calculate it. Oops, we got to put the numbers in. So this would be like 5 plus 10, right? Is 15. So now it actually works. It didn't say 510, it actually did the math operation. Very important. Before you can work with numbers, you always need to convert them into numbers from strings, okay? So when working with strings, if you need to do math operations on them, you always got to parse them into a number. You will use this a lot, okay? So let's go ahead and call this video done. We've done a few things here. We've talked about adding event listeners onto forms, and then we did a little bit of validation, okay, on these fields here to make sure they're not empty. And then we sent an error message appropriate for the situation to the user, and then we learned how to actually turn strings into numbers so we can start working with them. So really good stuff here. More to come. Mark Price here at DevSlopes.